Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott. I've been going over HTML5 and CSS3 courtesy of the Muroc HTML5 and CSS3 3rd edition text. And I've been doing this out of order. Alright. Sometimes I just need a little break, so if I'm going on CSS or whatever, I start with something else. So what I've done here, what I've decided to do, was next I want to go over the how to use responsive web design chapter. So I'm going to do that. Chapter 8 in the text, which starts on page 280. We have an introduction to responsive design, followed by how to implement a fluid design, followed by how to use CSS media queries, and finally a page that does use responsive web design. Alright, we actually talked about responsive web design in Chapter 1, so you may or may not remember it. But given an HTML document for the desktop that uses a fixed layout, convert it so it uses fluid widths, scalable images, and fonts inherited by child elements. Given an HTML document for the desktop that uses fluid layout, as opposed to fixed, add media queries that change the appearance of the page depending on the size of the screen where it's displayed. Given an HTML document with a navigation menu that uses media queries, use the Slick Nav plugin to replace the navigation menu on smaller screen sizes. Use the browser developer test tools to test responsive designs. Describe the three components, I should say, of a responsive web design. Describe 3 basic ways you can test a responsive web design. Explain how fluid layouts compare to fixed layouts. Explain why you should use relative font sizes with responsive design. Describe the use of the meta element for setting the viewport on mobile devices. Describe the basic syntax of a media query. Describe 2 standard approaches for developing the media queries for a responsive design. Finally, explain why you might want to use a Slick Nav menu when developing a responsive design. So, a website that uses RWD desktop. Well, you know what? It's very hard to tell from here. So what I'm going to try to do at least is to come in here and create a new chapter folder. So we'll call it Chapter 8 because that's what we're on. Alright, and then go out to the P drive as I have been doing. I should just keep this open. I'm out there so much, but it's fine. So again, this is Chapter 8, and I'm going to grab both of these. Alright, we've got a Chapter 8 fluid and a Chapter 8 media queries fluid. Okay, looks like it'll be interesting stuff. So, nope, I don't want to grab that. I want to grab the other one. There's my Chapter 4, and now I've got a Chapter 8. So, nope, I'm still on the P drive. I want to get onto my folder. So I want to be here. Chapter 8. There's nothing in there. Now there is. Alright, let's look at the media queries fluid. Okay. So this is what we have when we run it. It looks like this. And it may or may not mean a darn thing to you, but watch what happens. See what happens as I minimize my browser? This is basically mimicking what this is going to look like in a phone. You see how it still looks real nice? Everything is still there. And the menu, I can still bring it up if I want to. Alright, so we took that and created this out of it. Alright, let's look at the other one that's in here. I don't know if that one is going to be responsive or not, but we'll look at it anyway. So here's the other one. I think it's the same page. We'll run this one. And I don't know if you can tell, but I don't think at least it looks nearly as nice. See how the menu is kind of just all over the place here. There are 2 different, when you look in here, there are 2 different columns. It just doesn't look nearly as nice as that one looks. That one looks like it was made for the web and for a mobile device. All right, so that's what we talk about in this chapter. So let's close this and go back to here. All right. So they show some examples of using responsive web design. It's all nice. All right. On page 282, the author discusses the three components of responsive web design and defines them as being a fluid layout, which is used to adjust the width of the web page and its structural elements to the size of the screen. Media queries, which are used to adjust the appearance of a web page to different device sizes. And scalable images, so that the size of the image automatically gets scaled to the size of the element that contains it. Websites developed using responsive design are designed to adapt gracefully to the size of the screen in which the thing is being displayed. So, if you want a little bit more, with a fluid width, the width of the web page and its structural elements automatically adjust to the screen size. In the figure, for example, you can see the page always fills out 100% of the screen width. In addition, if you reduce the size of the browser window on the desktop, the width of the main content and sidebar always occupy the same percent of the window. All right, although you can use a fluid layout to adjust the widths of the structural elements on a page, you can't use them to adjust the appearance of a page. For that, you need media queries, which again allow you to change the appearance of a page based on conditions, such as screen length. Finally, a responsive design should use images whose sizes change along with the size of their containing elements. For example, the page that was shown here uses a scalable image for the image of the main content of the page. All right? That way, as the size of the element that contains the main content changes, the size of the image changes. So how to test responsive design? As you develop a website using responsive design, you'll of course want to test it in devices. All right, the best way to test it is to display the site, actually deploy it to a server and then test it on as many devices as possible. That may or may not be an option for you. Another option is to use device emulators and browser simulators that are available. There are a lot of developer tools that are out there that are useful, but many of those browser tools have shortcomings. For example, in IE, the options you have to choose from aren't that intuitive. In Firefox, you can't select specific devices. All right? So the three ways to test responsive design, again, are deploy it to a website, your website to a server, and then test it on each device you can. Second is to use emulators and browser simulators. And third is to use developer tools. Now, one thing about developer tools, and we've talked about this before, okay? But let's go and let's grab, right, we'll grab this one right here. Is this the one that is responsive? Yeah. Okay, good. So we'll grab this one and we'll go into hit F12. You saw this before. All right, now I've got to remember where it is, but someplace under here. Again, boy, I wish my memory wasn't as bad as it is. But somewhere on here, it's not elements, I don't think. It's not console. It's not sources, or network, or timeline, or profiles. So, styles or event listeners, DOM breakpoints, or properties. There is a setting in here. I don't remember. Well, let's see if we can let the internet find it for us. How to bring up a browser emulator in Chrome Developer Tools. Go to the Dev Tools settings. Let me grab this and just copy that to the clipboard and bring that up here. Okay, so I'll have that. All right. So go to the Dev Tools setting. I don't even know where that is offhand. do the following. Let's shrink this way the hay down to about 12 points. There we go. Go to the Developer Tools settings. Activate the Devices tab. Well, I just must be totally out of it right now. Click on Add Custom Device button at the bottom of the panel. Fill in the form that appears on the left of the list. Press Add Device. Enable the device mode. Alright, I'll have to come back with this, but I will show you there is a way in here that you can come into here and you can literally have this show, but have it show so that it's in a browser emulator. Alright? And why would you want to do that? Because there's a lot of different emulators that you can choose from. You can see how it would look in an iPhone 6. You can see how it would look on an iPad, on an Android device. You can see how, whatever basically you want. And it's not hard to do. I just, for whatever reason, can't remember right now how to do it. So. It's probably very easy to do. That's usually that's when I have the problems with it. Alright, I don't want to watch that guy, so I will, but I'm just not going to do it right now. Alright, but we will try to hold me to that if you can. We will try to look at that. Alright. So we already talked about these 3 ways to test this. And we talked a little bit about using developer tools. Alright. On pages 286 and 287, they talk about how to implement a fluid design. And they compare fluid designs with fixed layouts. And that's what you see on your screen. Alright. The benefit of using a fluid layout is page layouts are proportional to the size of the screen. So they'll fill the screen equally at all screen sizes. They're also scalable, so when new screen sizes become available in the future, be they bigger or smaller, they'll automatically adapt. Finally, they can be used without media queries in some cases. Okay? So a fixed layout, and what you see on here is this is fixed. Okay? The fixed layout uses absolute measurements to specify the widths of a page. So notice 600 pixels and 360 pixels. On the other hand, a fluid layout uses percentages and its main structural elements. This meets the challenge of a web page adapting gracefully to all screen sizes. So you want to use fluid when you can. So again, there's the benefits. They give you a formula. This is on pages 288 and 289 for converting pixels to percents. And they say that if you've already developed a web page with fixed widths, you need to know how to convert those widths to pixels, in pixels to widths in percents, and that you use that formula that's at the top of the screen there. Now they show some examples here in some CSS. Remember, the width of the outermost element will determine how much of the screen the page occupies. You typically set this width between 90 and 100%. In addition to converting widths of the structure elements on a page to percent, you should convert the left and right margins and padding to percents as well. Alright, to limit the width of an element, you can use the max width property. This property is typically used to limit the width of the entire page. Alright. Back in Chapter 4 of the book, the author recommended that you use relative measurements for font sizes. When you do that, you can vary the sizes by using the browser. This is important for responsive design too. By varying the font sizes, the size of the font that's used by an element will be relative to the size of the font used by the parent element. So if you want to change the font size that's used by the parent and all of its child elements, all you need to do is to change the font size of the parent. When you use ems or percents, the size you specify is relative to the size of the parent, again, which makes it easy to change. The default font size for many browsers is 16 pixels. Because of that, you can calculate the font size by the font size you want to use in M's by dividing the font size in pixels by 16. Then to calculate that as a percent, you multiply the result by 100. But there can be issues in older browsers too. All right. There's what I just mentioned to you right here. Okay. Scaling images. We've talked about this before. As the width of an element in the fluid design changes, you'll typically want the width of any images associated with that element to change as well. In other words, you want the image to scale with the element. All right. The way that normally this is done is you come in your CSS and you say width 100%. So to create a scalable image, you remove any height and width attributes from the HTML for the image. In addition, you set the max width of the image to a percent of the containing block. If you want to limit the size of the native width, you can do it here. But again, most often people set the max width to 100. All right. Some developers also like to set the height property to auto. That way the aspect ratio of the height should remain pretty much, a good ratio to the width as you change regardless of how you scale the image. Okay? All right. So we've talked fixed design, we've talked fluid layout, or fixed layout, fluid layout, and scalable image. Here's a page with fluid layout. This page uses a fluid layout where the widths of the elements, margins, and padding are coded as percents. That way the widths of the elements change as the width of the browser window changes. Both of the images on the page are scalable. The logo in the header is scaled so that it occupies a percent of the header width, and the image in the article is scaled so it occupies the entire width of the article. All right. The font sizes for the page are coded in M's, but these sizes don't change as the width of the browser window changes. To change them, you need CSS media queries. So the bottom line is there is so much to consider as you're doing this stuff. All right. So here's an example. This is a page on a mobile device without and with what's called a meta viewport element. So in most of the rest of the chapter here, you'll learn how to use media queries to control the appearance of a page in various screen sizes. You'll also learn how to build responsive themes using a jQuery plugin called SlickNav. But first, we have to learn how to control the mobile viewport that works in conjunction with media queries. To start, you should know that the viewport on a mobile browser works differently from the viewport on a desktop. On a desktop, the viewport is the visible area on the web page. The user can change the size of the viewport by changing the size of the browser window. In contrast, the viewport on a mobile device can be larger or smaller than the visible area. All right, and you know this if you pinch, etc., that there's different things that you can do. Now, the content properties are shown here on page 297, and they include width, which is the logical viewport width in pixels, height, which is the logical viewport height in pixels, initial scale, which is a number that indicates the initial zoom factor that's used for the page, minimum scale, which is the minimum zoom factor for the page, maximum scale, which is the maximum zoom factor for the page, and user scalable, which indicates whether or not the user can zoom in or out. So possible values, of course, are yes and no. So the viewport on a mobile device determines the content that's displayed on the screen. You use a meta element to control the viewport settings for the device, and you can see an example here. When you use media queries, you should set the width property of the content attribute to device width, and you should set the initial scale property to 1. Okay. Here's the basic syntax of a media query. In a media query, is a CSS feature that allows you to write conditional expressions right in your CSS code, and basically, for lack of better words, they're based on the size of the device that you're using. So the syntax is shown on the top. Common properties include the width, which is the viewport width, height, which is the viewport height, device width, which is the width of the device area of the display area of the device, device height, which is the height of the display area of the device, and orientation, which is landscape or portrait. So media queries are defined by using a CSS at media selector, which specifies the media type for the query, all right, and if you want for the screen type size. Each conditional expression can check one of the properties that you see up here. These properties can be prefixed with min or max also, min height, max height, etc. The screen size at which the query is used to change the appearance is referred to as the breakpoint. Media queries are supported by all current versions of the major browsers. They're also supported by all current versions of the mobile browsers. If you include the only keyword, older browsers that don't support media queries will check the media type, but not the conditional expressions. So here are some maximum, okay? So notice the example that's here, the first one says, at media only screen and max width of 767. Since there's no min width, that particular query will handle any viewport, so any screen size that's 767 pixels down to 0, technically. In the next example, notice we have a minimum width and a maximum width. So this example will handle everything between 480 pixels, so greater than or equal to 480 pixels and less than or equal to 767 pixels, where the first one is just less than or equal to 767 pixels. One standard technique for developing media queries for a responsive design is to start with queries for larger devices and work your way down. Another is to design for the smallest and work your way up. When you use either of these techniques, each media query inherits the styles that precede it in the style sheet. Then the media queries, of course, can override any inherited style. You can also code this starting set of styles in a media query. For a desktop, for example, you could say, a minimum width of 960 pixels, type of an idea. What if you don't want to do that? Okay? What if this just all seems like way too much work to you? Well, when you develop a responsive design, you need to provide for menus that can be accessed easily on small mobile devices. We've already looked at an example of that, and there's an example right here also. One way to do that is to use a jQuery plugin that's called SlickNav. To use this plugin, you download the zip file from http://slicknav.com. Then you unzip the file, you add the slicknav.css to your CSS folder, you add the jQuery.slicknav.min.js file to your JS folder. Before you can use this plugin on a web page, you have to include a link element for the slicknav.css and a script tag, of course, for the jQuery slicknav.min.js. You have to also include the jQuery core library, and that must be put in before the jQuery.slicknav.min.js. So to use this, you add a script element with a jQuery code like that shown here that refers to the element that contains the unordered list for the menu. Then you use the CSS display property to hide and display the mobile menu depending on the size of the screen. Okay? So let's look at a page that uses responsive web design. So here you see the same page, and there it is in desktop, and there it is in phone layout. in both landscape and portrait mode. Now this web page uses a fluid layout, and it uses scalable images. It also uses media queries to change the appearance of the page depending on the size of the screen where it's displayed. The tablet portrait for this page is identical to the desktop and the tablet layout, except that the font sizes are reduced. The HTML for this is shown right here on page 307. The CSS for the page is shown on page 309. And that's the CSS that controls the appearance of the page, and on 311 is the CSS that controls the page layout. So there's a lot of CSS in here. It goes on to 313 also. Alright, so I'm done for the night. We have finished Chapter 8 on responsive web design. And hopefully by now you have at least a little better idea of what responsive web design is, how it's used, etc. All right, it's I guess it sounds almost too hokey to say it's the wave of the future, but it basically is the way most websites are set up. You know that the use of mobile devices keeps increasing all the time. Now more people access the internet from mobile devices, meaning a mobile phone or a tablet, than they do using a desktop or a laptop. So in this chapter we learn how to develop websites using responsive web design, or RWD. Remember, the highlight is that you use fluid layouts to adjust the width of the page depending on the screen size. You use media queries to adjust the appearance of a page depending on the screen size, and you use scalable image to adjust the size of images depending on the screen size. When you put all that stuff together, you should be able to build the best looking site possible for any device, be it mobile or not.